a satin stitch, the things that you have to keep in mind when digitizing a satin stitch is the width of your column. If this right here is too wide to be an effective satin stitch, I want to stay between 1 and 8 for my width. So when I'm putting a satin stitch in, point, I'm ready to put that counterpoint at the middle of the screen. In the bottom, you'll see the length. Right now, I'm at about 4.69, 5.74, 6.8, 8.09. That's a little bit wide for a regular normal satin. Back down here, 4.4. I'm perfect right in the middle of a nice satin stitch. Now the other thing when dealing with a satin stitch, it doesn't matter whether you start bottom, top, left, right, it doesn't really make a difference, but you cannot cross. Okay? This cross will give you undesired results. So it doesn't matter. I'm going to delete some of this. Doesn't matter which way I start. I just don't want to come in here and decide to switch gears halfway through. There's no way to fix that other than manually moving all these points, which I really don't want to have to do. Okay? The other thing that you've got to keep in mind when digitizing a satin stitch is the crossbars. These crossbars that you see, they represent the angle the stitches are following. Now look at this design. See how it really angles right there? Well, I only put one in there that was kind of bad, so it's not a big deal. But here's what I don't want to do if I can avoid it. You know, if I do something like this, look at my stitches. Okay? Whereas if I just pull these back a little bit, much better now. Okay? So those crossbars are important. It doesn't matter whether you want to go ahead and get it done and then go back in and edit them, or whether you want to get them right, you know, as you're going. Either way, I find myself a lot of times, what happens is I get into a hurry. I'm trying to get it done, and all of a sudden I realize I put a bunch of points in that the angle's just off. And so I'll just have to go back in and manipulate those and move them and get them, you know, to where I want them so that my quality is a little bit better. Nothing wrong there. That's just kind of, you know, that's kind of common for that to happen. Now, let me delete some of these, and let's look at our G. Now, I could go in and find a font for this G, okay? But I'm not going to do it right now. When you're digitizing a satin, especially a series of satins like this G would be, you want to think about the way you're going to do it so that the placement and the overlap is correct. Thinking about this design, we would want this part to come before this part. Okay? Because it's going to be tucked up underneath there nice and neat. If I'm just going to do a section of it right now. If we do it the opposite, if I do this part, and I'm not going to do the whole part, no, I'll just do part of it. And then I come over here and do this part. See it sitting on top there? Don't worry about the exit point. Just see how it's sitting over that? Well, that's not really what we want. It would be better served if this part came first, and see how tucked up underneath, nice and neat that is? Those are things we have to think about when doing our satin stitch. You know, what do we do first so that that edge is tucked in nice and neat up underneath there? Now look right here. Can you see? Let me see that green stitch right there? That's a jump stitch. You know why that's? Anybody know why that's there? Anybody want to type in a quick guess as to why that jump stitch is there? Alright. The jump stitch is there because I told this shape to exit right there. Exactly. My exit point's wrong. My exit point needs to be over here. And now I don't have that jump stitch in there. Very good. Remember where you're exiting and what you're doing when putting in your exit point. Now continue on looking at this shape. Let's say, realistically, if I were going to digitize this, and I'm not using a font, I'm digitizing it manually, I'm going to go from the bottom, and this circle part of the G is my last thing that sews. I've got to do this part, I've got to do this curved part, I've got to do this part, and then this part. Alright, so I'm doing this part first, then I'm doing this part, then I'm doing this part, and then I'm finishing with that part. Alright, well how do I do that? How do I do it so that everything looks like it looks right here, where it's overlapped properly and all that? Well, alright, let's start off by focusing on this right here. Okay? It's a satin stitch. Point, counterpoint. Curve, 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 all the way around. Now, once I get down here, right-click to tell it I'm done. I'm going to exit right there. The reason I'm going to exit right there is, alright, there's no way to tuck this underneath and still finish up right here. Can't do it. So I'm going to blend these two pieces together. Alright, I'm still on my satin stitch. I exited here. That's where I'm going to start my next piece. Point, counterpoint. Come around. Now, right here where I've got this overlap, see how they kind of are going in the same direction, you know, right in this area right here, see my crossbars are kind of the same. That's going to kind of merge that and mesh that in together so that you don't see, I mean, the overlap is going to be there. There's nothing you can do to totally eliminate it. But it's because it's a satin, satins tend to be a little more open. It's going to fall in a little bit better. Okay? It's going to work together to help so that you don't see that as much. Now, let's turn our stitches off. I'm going to get rid of you. I'm going to get rid of you. All right, so we exited right here. I need to be right there. What I'm going to do to get there is I'm going to use a running stitch. Now, way back in the beginning, we talked about running stitches. I said that it can be used to connect one area to another. And this is exactly what I'm talking about. I need to get from here to here, and I don't want the machine to have to stop and cut. Running stitch, still the same color. I'm just going to kind of run right down the middle, and then I'm going to right click twice and exit right there. Switch back to satin, point, counterpoint, curve, curve, point, counterpoint, right click to tell it I'm done. That's a fine spot for my exit point. Right click again, and I'm ready to do this part right here. Well, yes, I can do it as a satin stitch, but I could also use my satin serial tool right here. Running stitch, trace around the outer edge, and I'm just middle clicking my mouse. Now, I don't have to put a point right there. Tab closes my running stitch shape. Now, I want to use my satin serial tool. I've done the outside edge, so I need to pull it to the inside. I need to make sure my cap locks are turned on. I press the F key for Frank. I grab any one of these points, does not matter which one. Left click and drag it in. Once I get the width that I want, left click to set it, right click twice. Now I had a little bit of an issue right there. Just double click on that, pull you in just a little bit, pull you in just a little bit. Makes these minor adjustments here. And there we go. There's my design. Okay? Now, I can modify this satin stitch. I can adjust my stitch settings. This tells me that I'm using a satin. This is how I adjust it. I adjust my pitch to make it tighter. You know, going back to this design, let's say this red area is white and the green is black, and when I stitch it out, I'm seeing some white come through here. Drop this number down. Okay? Only time you would ever go below 0.30 is if you're working with foam. Okay? Otherwise, I usually rarely get down to 0.3, but you can go that low if you need to. Now, The other way is going up, is opening up that pitch. Well, we had a question about the border. On this design, you certainly could run that border so it tucks in those nice and neat, especially if that border was the green color. Okay? But yes, and it would be very easy to do. Go to Views and Snapshot and turn on your snapshot. This is my snapshot here. This is my sewing sequence. Well, if I wanted it to be the last thing that's sewed, easy, I just right-click on the frame and say Reorder to End. And it'll drop it to the end. Okay? Or I could click and drag. So I can reorder either way. But you're right, Charlotte. If you wanted that to have, even if it was red or the first color, and you wanted it to close off this bottom of the G nice and neat, then yes, you would run it around last. You're exactly right. Now, since we're talking about a snapshot here, of course, this is how you resequence your design. It shows you section by section how it's going to stitch out, and it shows you the stitch count for every section. Not to get off digitizing totally, but if you bring in stock designs, maybe from Dakota, maybe that you've purchased, you've downloaded, whatever, I always go through my snapshot and check for unnecessary jump stitches. You're going to find, and not that these were done wrong, I'm not saying that at all, but older designs have more jump stitches in there because years ago when you digitized, you had to put a jump stitch in for whenever you went to each section. So you finished one section, you wanted to go somewhere else, you put in a jump stitch, and then you started doing that next section. That was how you digitized your designs years and years ago. We've kind of, technology and stuff have kind of gotten past that. We don't need those jump stitches anymore. They're kind of more of a nuisance than anything else. I had a design that somebody sent me last week, and I thought she's not in class today. But anyway, she was resequencing her design, and she was doing it correctly, but the problem was the design had a lot of extra jump stitches in there. Well, she didn't realize that they had jump stitches because they're hard to see, and so she was resequencing, and the sequence was still wrong, and she couldn't figure out why. And so we had to go in and go through and delete those jump stitches, and then once we did that, the sequence was fine. So if you see a frame that shows one single stitch and it looks like it's blank, that's your jump stitch. You can click on the little checkbox, press the delete key on the keyboard, refresh your snapshot, and it will delete it out of there. And so, again, on older designs that I'm bringing in to work with, I usually go through this process and check them just to see. And if they're in there, I just get rid of them because they're more of a nuisance than anything else at this point, Now, the other thing that you can do with your snapshot is you can see it by color. So if I need to grab everything of the one color, I can grab it down here. It selects it up there. Okay? All these parts to that G were one color. It also shows you by stitch effect. In this design, we're using 4 stitch types. We're using a fill for our circle. We're using a running to connect from this area to that area. We're using a satin, and it made a satin border. You know what? If I want it to be the same, if I've adjusted these stitch settings, went in here and made it tighter, made it more open, whatever I wanted to do, then I can take this, make it the same settings as the other. Okay? Few other things in here that we can adjust. Of course, our pitch. Corners. Ethos defaults to a mitered corner. Nice, professional looking corner. If I know I've got a really, really small area and it's got some satins, I'll turn that off. That's your normal corner. The stitches turn. See them leaning and turning? Block corners. If you turn both of these on, corners on and block corners, this is what a block corner looks like. So it's all the way to the edge, so it's all the way over it. Primarily, people use block corners for applique. You've got a stitch effect built in called zigzag. That would be a good time to use a block corner. Okay? Compensation. Again, going back, talking about compensation. Remember what your satin stitch does. Your satin stitch pulls in, or puts one stitch on one side, one stitch on the other, with nothing in between. That is common. Alright? It's going to pull by nature. You know, looking at this little preview we have on the screen here, we're back down to 0.4. Whoops, sorry. I've got a needle penetration right there. I've got one right there, but I have nothing in there. So by nature, this stitch is pulling this way, and this stitch is pulling up that way. That's what a satin stitch does. It's just going to do it. Well, we combat that by giving it compensation. Right now it's on 0. Let's zoom in on our satin border. I'm going to switch the view, and I'm going to hide my image. Now, actually I'm going to turn off my fill stitch too. There's my satin stitch. You can see it go to the edge of my satin column that or my border that I made. Okay? There's the zigzag underlay. Now, if I come in here and I give it compensation, I'm going to turn off this. I'm going to say, let's say 15%. Say OK. Generate stitches. Now look at what that satin stitch has done. See how that 15% has pushed those stitches out? It says, okay, I know you're going to pull because you're a satin stitch. I'm going to compensate for that by spreading you out a little further. I almost always use compensation on a satin stitch. How much I use depends on what I'm sewing on. T-shirt, polo shirt, sweatshirt, fleece, towel, things that are going to give, I want more compensation. Twill, satin, denim, things that don't pull, I'm not going to give as much compensation because they don't need it. I'll probably do 10, whereas other things I'll give 15%. We had a question on what to use on puffy foam. Well, on puffy foam, again, it's kind of going back to your fabric you're stitching on, but then also you got to realize that your pitch is extremely tight on that foam. You're using a density for puffy foam instead of 0.4 of 0.18. But the tighter that stitch is, the more it's going to have a tendency to pull. So again, I would definitely use compensation, and I might use, 15%, 12%, somewhere around there. Okay? Because that pitch is so tight that just by the tightness of the pitch alone it's pulling those stitches in. Okay? Now you have 11 underlay choices with your satin stitch. Hold on, Carrie. I'll get to your question in 1 second. Let me finish up right here and we'll talk about that. You have tacking, which is no underlay. It defaults to zigzag. And then you have the zigzag cross double on the side over here on the right. Anytime you need more underlay, you're going to use one of the ones on the right. Things like fleece and beanies and stuff like that, you're going to use this. You're not sure? Stay right here. Need just a little bit more? Come down to your cross. Don't need so much underlay. You got small area, double, single. Don't need any underlay. Tacking. Okay? So that's when you use the different underlays. All right. Now, I had a question on the snapshot. Now look, this right here is not giving me it's showing you my color sequence, but I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 greens in there. That's not 5 color changes, okay? This design, when I do a print preview, only has 2 colors. It shows out, well, I'm sorry, I don't have everything stitched out. Hold on. 1 second. Now go to print preview. So there's my sequence. Fill, green G, red border. Okay? So, sorry. Here's my sequence. Fill, green, and then red border. All right? So my snapshot is not necessarily showing me my sewing. It's showing me my sewing sequence, but it's not how I program on my machine. Okay, I can see I've got all these different greens. That doesn't mean this is a color, this is a color, this is a color. They're all the same. And if I look, when I look at it by color, you have 2 choices. You can do it where it shows the color change, like I've got it. See, it shows red. It shows color 1, color 2, and back to color 1. So I'm having it show me my color changes. Or here, see, this is not my sewing sequence. It grouped all the red together and it grouped all the green together. Okay? So it's a matter of right-clicking on here and showing my color changes or not. Okay? If you show color changes, this is going to be very close to your sewing sequence. If I bring up another design, let me bring up something else. Hold on. No, not that one. Let me find something here. Okay, so here, see now if I go by color, now this is my sequence. But if I were to not, oh well, these don't have, these are the same. Not a good choice. Hold on. Let's see. Okay, let's try this one. Now, here we go. This is a good one. See how here it's going to show it section by section, and it's going to show the color change. Okay? If I don't show the color change, it's just showing them all as the same color. So I've got to look at how I'm using this to actually see my sequence. This is not a great way to check out your sewing, how you program your machine. It's a great way to see, what sections are sewing when, but not necessarily the way it's sewing out. I usually go to my print preview to look at that right there. Okay? All right. Now, let's go back to our design. A few more things that we can do here, and then we'll finish up. One cool feature that we have for a satin stitch, and I'm going to find a satin G that's kind of close to. I don't want that one. Hold on. Okay, now what I can do is I can actually split this apart. Okay, so what I can do is I can come in here, pick a point, go to point and split, pick this point, go to point and split, and now I've broken that apart. Okay, so with the satin stitch, I can go in and split it apart if I need to. All right. Now, with a satin stitch, I can also add a border. If I want to put a border around this G, now we know it's a couple of different sections, okay? But I can come in here using my Shift key and pick all 4 sections. I didn't get the running portion, okay? Outlines, borders, satin around satin. Tell it how wide, tell it my needle color, say OK. And there's my border. Now see how it went ahead and joined them together for me. Even though they were separate sections, this was a section, this was a section, this was a section, and this was a section. Because where they touched and overlapped, it figured that out for me. Alright, so if I needed a border on there, I could. Now what I can also do with the satin stitch is I can use a nice feature called Expand Satin. I can take this blue area and I grab both parts, go to Outlines, Compensation, Expand Satin. Now, with Expand Satin, I can go in and expand the left, the right, or the middle. The middle's going to do it 50-50, okay? I can do it by percentage or by millimeter. As I increase it, you can see it increasing on the screen. As I narrow it, you can see it getting narrower. So you can go up or down. Apply, close. So I can make any satin stitch, whether it's a border or a satin stitch that I digitized or a letter, doesn't matter. I can use the Expand Satin on there to make it thicker, to make it bigger, to make it fatter. Now, what I normally do, let me come out here, let me get rid of this stuff here. What I normally do, once I'm done with my design, at that point, I'll go in and set my colors. Okay? I usually do that at the end because I like to work with contrasting colors so that I can see them better. So, like for this design, we were talking about red and white. I'll get rid of this blue because that was not part of the design really. I just wanted to show you that expand of that border. Alright, so I'm going to go here to my thread palette. That's this icon right there. Over here it shows me with asterisks what I'm using in my design. Alright, I'm using colors 1 and color 2. Well, what embroidery thread do I use? Here's all the major lines over here. If I use Fufu, I don't really know what color this is in Fufu. I can match it up. If this is right, click on it. It adds that color into my design. We know this second color was white. Color map, click on white, OK, match. If this is it, click on it. Now, say OK. At this point, I like to go through Finalized Design. Finalized Design is my checkerboard right here. This function will automatically finalize your completed design. Do you want to continue? Yes, I do. First off, what kind of fabric am I stitching on? If I'm not comfortable with this yet, and I don't really know, then I can come in here and pick any one on this list. Of course, here's my default. Delicate fabric like, you know, your wicking materials, your satins, your silks, lightweight stuff, fleece. If you had preset your settings, you know how we kind of gone in today and set our pitch and and play with our underlay and stuff? If we had done all that, I want to cancel this particular step right here. Okay? Otherwise, if I had already changed settings and then I come over here and pick polo shirt, it's going to change them to something else. It's going to save my design. Yes, that's what I want it to do. It deleted that image that was back there. Okay? Now, I'm ready to put this on a disk and send it to my machine. All right, so that's the whole process right there. You know, finalizing my design is great. If we go under Edit and Settings, this box down here, that's all the things that Finalized Design does. It centers my design. Yeah, I want it to do that. It restitches. Yeah, I want it to do that. It deletes the image that I'm working on. Well, maybe not on that one. You know, if you're confident that you're not going to need that image anymore, then yeah, then you want it to do that. If your lettering is smaller and your column widths are very narrow, it'll give you a warning. It won't stop you from doing it, but it is going to give you a warning that said that it's going to say your text is very small. You might get undesired results. It's going to set base fabric. It's going to ask you your fabric type. If you're to the point where you don't need that, you already know what fabric settings to use, turn it off. That way you can still use Finalized Design and won't have to worry about that step popping up anymore. If you're using Brother equipment, you don't need the jump to start. You might have seen, if you've not changed this, because it defaults on, it'll put an extra color change at the end of your design. You might have seen that when you're programming in your design. Turn that feature off. Once you turn it off one time, it stays off until you turn it on again. Anybody that's using strictly Brother equipment, I recommend they go in and turn that feature off. Save your design. Yes, I want it to save it. Tidy up. All this means is any stitch smaller than this number, 0.4 or 0.3, it's going to delete. That's all the things that happen when you push that button. All right, so we've come to the end.